There was a clack thump thud beneath her as chunks of wood flew up against the undercarriage, and then her trusty expedition began pogoing up and down and pulling to the left, like a horse that's gone lame. She wrestled it into the weedy yard of the deserted store, wanting to get it off the road so someone who happened to come tearing around that last curve wouldn't rear-end her. She hadn't seen much traffic on Stag Road, but there'd been some, including a couple of large trucks. "God damn you, Ramona," she said. She knew it wasn't really the librarian's fault. The head, and probably only member, of the Richard Widmark Fan Appreciation Society, Chicopee branch, had only been trying to be helpful, but Tess didn't know the name of the dummox who had dropped his nail-studded shit on the road and then gone gaily on his way, so Ramona had to do. "Would you like me to recalculate your route, Tess?" Tom asked, making her jump. She turned the GPS off, then killed the engine, as well. She wasn't going anywhere for a while. It was very quiet out here. She heard birdsong, a metallic ticking sound like an old wind-up clock, and nothing else. The good news was that the expedition seemed to be leaning to the left front instead of just leaning. Perhaps it was only the one tire. She wouldn't need a tow, if that was the case, just a little help from AAA. When she got out and looked at the left front tire, she saw a splintered piece of wood impaled on it by a large, rusty spike. Tess uttered a one-syllable expletive that had never crossed the lips of a Knitting Society member, and got her cell phone out of the little storage compartment between the bucket seats. She would now be lucky to get home before dark, and Fritzy would have to be content with his bowl of dry food in the pantry. So much for Ramona Norville's shortcut. Although to be fair, Tess supposed the same thing could have happened to her on the interstate. Certainly she had avoided her share of potentially car-crippling crap on many throughways, not just I-84. The conventions of horror tales and mysteries, even mysteries of the bloodless, one-corpse variety enjoyed by her fans, were surprisingly similar, and as she flipped open her phone she thought, in a story, it wouldn't work. This was a case of life imitating art, because when she powered up her Nokia, the words "no service" appeared in the window. Of course. Being able to use her phone would be too simple. She heard an indifferently muffled engine approaching, turned, and saw an old white van come around the curve that had done her in. On the side was a cartoon skeleton pounding a drum kit that appeared to be made out of cupcakes. Written in drippy horror movie script above this apparition, much more peculiar than a fan photo of Richard Widmark on a librarian's office wall, were the words "Zombie Bakers." For a moment Tess was too bemused to wave, and when she did, the driver of the Zombie Baker's truck was busy trying to avoid the mess on the road and didn't notice her. He was quicker to the shoulder than Tess had been, but the van had a higher center of gravity than the Expedition, and for a moment she was sure it was going to roll and land on its side in the ditch. It stayed up, barely, and regained the road beyond the spilled chunks of wood. The van disappeared around the next curve, leaving behind a blue cloud of exhaust and a smell of hot oil. "Damn you, zombie bakers!" Tess yelled, then began to laugh. Sometimes it was all you could do. She clipped her phone to the waistband of her dress slacks, went out to the road, and began picking up the mess herself. She did it slowly and carefully, because up close it became obvious that all the pieces of wood, which were painted white and looked as if they had been stripped away by someone in the throes of a home renovation project, had nails in them. Big ugly ones. She worked slowly because she didn't want to cut herself, but she also hoped to be out here, observably doing a good work of Christian charity, when the next car came along. But by the time she'd finished picking up everything but a few harmless splinters and casting the big pieces into the ditch below the shoulder of the road, no other cars had come along. Perhaps, she thought, the zombie bakers had eaten everyone in this immediate vicinity and were now hurrying back to their kitchen to put the leftovers into the always popular people pies. She walked back to the defunct store's weedy parking lot and looked moodily at her leaning car. $30,000 worth of rolling iron, four-wheel drive, independent disc brakes, Tom the talking TomTom. And all it took to leave you stranded was a piece of wood with a nail in it. But of course they all had nails, she thought. In a mystery, or a horror movie, that wouldn't constitute carelessness, that would constitute a plan. A trap, in fact. Too much imagination, Tessa Jean, she said, quoting her mother. And that was ironic, of course, since it was her imagination that had ended up providing her with her daily bread. Not to mention the Daytona Beach home where her mother had spent the last 6 years of her life. In the big silence she again became aware of that tinny ticking sound. The abandoned store was of a kind you didn't see much in the 21st century. It had a porch. The left-hand corner had collapsed and the railing was broken in a couple of places, but yes, it was an actual porch, charming even in its dilapidation. Maybe because of its dilapidation. Tess supposed general store porches had become obsolete because they encouraged you to sit a spell and chat about baseball or the weather instead of just paying up and hustling your credit cards on down the road to some other place where you could swipe them at the checkout. A tin sign hung askew from the porch roof. It was more faded than the SO sign. She took a few steps closer, raising a hand to her forehead to shade her eyes. "You like it, IT likes you." Which was a slogan for what, exactly? She had almost plucked the answer from her mental junk heap when her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an engine. As she turned toward it, sure that the zombie bakers had come back after all, the sound of the motor was joined by the scream of ancient brakes. It wasn't the white van but an old Ford F-150 pickup with a bad blue paint job and Bondo around the headlights. A man in bib overalls and a gimme cap sat behind the wheel. He was looking at the litter of wood scraps in the ditch. "Hello?" Tess called. "Pardon me, sir?" He turned his head, saw her standing in the overgrown parking lot, flicked a hand in salute, pulled in beside her expedition, and turned off his engine. Given the sound of it, Tess thought that an act tantamount to mercy killing. "Hey, there," he said. "Did you pick that happy crappy up off the road?" "Yes, all but the piece that got my left front tire. And my phone doesn't work out here," she almost added, then didn't. She was a woman in her late 30s who went 120 soaking wet, and this was a strange man.